This is APH's Access Academy, and today we continue our Braille 2000s series called Textbook Transcription from Start to Finish. We are set today for day 5 of 6 in the series, which means we will learn how to explore features you may find in NYMIS generated files, and this includes sidebars, line numbered text such as in poetry, footnotes, math, and pronunciation keys. Back to share her skill and her expertise is Rosemary Baggett. Thank you so much for being with us to continue showing us what to do through demonstration.
Thank you, Amy. As Amy, we're going to go just a quick overview today. We'll cover footnotes or notes within the NYMIS files for Braille transcription pronunciation keys, math and MathML, and then miscellaneous. There are a few. This is just one item. There'll be a few items in the miscellaneous section, including the line number text. So with that, we'll start with notes. I've copied a good bit of the format section onto these slides because there are so many types and places where notes happen in a print text. So just to go over this, all types of notes in this section and format, section 16, are simply called notes in this section. And they give the reader additional information, for example, pronunciation of a word. Format 16.1.2 talks about the print reference mark. The purpose of these guidelines, a print reference mark is defined as any number, letter, or character used to indicate that there's an additional note to the matter that's being discussed. Print uses many different symbols to indicate the presence of a note. For example, asterisks, dagger, hollow dots, superscripted numbers or letters, etc. NYMIS files do import quite a few of these. The transcriber, as usual, may need to edit or insert according to the UEB guidelines. In a print text, as we know, these explanatory notes can be located any number of places: the foot of a page, in the margin, between lines of narrative text, in columns facing the narrative text, on a page facing the narrative text, immediately above or below, columned or tabular material, and in a note section, which could be either at the end of each chapter or at the back of a book. Online with the URL provided in print. Oh, there are times that these notes can be located online. I understand what I wrote there. So, Braille reader's perspective. This is, I want to take a look at this on the format site because this is so important for transcribers. A lot of these show up in the NYMIS files. The question is, where do you put it on the Braille page so that and these are the things to consider. So I'm in the formats HTML file online and looking at section 16.1.6. This is basically going to be your Bible. For transcription. Notes must be easy to find when necessary, but also easy to skip for uninterrupted reading. That's what we consider as transcribers. So again, not the NYMIS files are going to be able to figure that out for you. That's where your formatting comes in. So just a brief demo here. We look at one example of note usage in a NYMIS file. And I have I have so many files open today. This is gonna. All right, this is the NYMIS import of a particular table in a chemistry book. I do have a print copy of that page. And see if that shows up on here or not. I have some of them on each screen. Just drag this over. So this was the table in the chemistry book, and you'll see there are a couple of places down here where there's an asterisk in the left column under substance after ammonia, one after carbon dioxide, one after oxygen. Print places that down here at the bottom. According to formats, any note like that should precede a table. If it's in a table, because they're going to need that information before they get into the table. So let's look at how it came in the NIMAS file. This is the NIMAS table in Braille 2000. Turn the interpreter on. And you'll see, we talked about tables a few days ago. Braille 2000 formatted the table a specific way. This was actually the table that I did on facing pages. And in this particular file, the note itself did not come in. What I did was I used the search feature in Braille 2000 to look for the text of the note. It was not there. However, the asterisks, the symbols are in here. So as a transcriber, you would look and you find how much is there. The asterisks are there. That's helpful. And then the note I had to do with direct entry. Sometimes, often they will come in the text, but because that text was tiny at the bottom of the page, I'm guessing that's why it wasn't recognized. And I'm looking for the actual file where it was transcribed. So here was the, this is how I formatted it in the transcription. There was a box preceding that. For a transcriber's note, table 4 is shown in Braille across 2 facing pages. And I followed that with the note, which I transcribed directly from the text. And then the table was down here. Let's see, I reformatted the table. We talked about this the other day to make it more accessible, readable. So here are the asterisks already there. I put the note in up front. This is just one of many examples. It's going to take looking at the text and seeing where does this fit and following formats, which it's extensive. So that's the one example I have for today. And go back to here and see if there are any questions so far.
We have no questions. We can go ahead and move into pronunciation.
Okay. Pronunciation covered in formats section 20. Basic, sometimes, various systems for representing the pronunciation of speech appear in textbooks. Publishers sometimes use unique systems. It's not possible to include all of them in these guidelines. This section provides guidance for transcribing simple pronunciation and diacritics. 20.2 has common guidelines for all pronunciation. The NIMAS files I found to convert the pronunciation pretty well. I still always check with formats and UAB guidelines. I have a pronunciation key here, a sample. A lot of print today. Key there, yay, found it. So this was the print page, a section of the print page in a upper level science book. Glossary at the beginning has the pronunciation key like this. It's shown in print as a table. All of this came in NIMAS, and I'm going to show you the 2 different versions because I had okay, I have to open those from this day. I had Braille 2000 direct import and also Braille 2000 via Braille Blaster. So coming in, pulling these files up right now, I copied a section of these files. The NIMAS files themselves are huge, but just the section relevant for this demo. Here's that beginning of that page. This was in the Braille Blaster import. So you see the things I'll have to format. We already talked about these earlier in the course. just a sample. I'll do a little bit of overlap today since we're nearing the end. As I would be going through a file, I'm never looking for just one thing. You're looking for whatever comes up. So there's your heading. Should not have bold tape and should be in cell 5. So I edit that as I go. Then I get down here to, this is the actual pronunciation key. Now the way they did this does not really, well, sometimes it gets complicated. The NIMAS file is computer generated. So they're reading this file and trying to figure out what's needed where in the table. And you see they repeat the back every time, which is not what we want. So let's look at another translation, looking back at the print while I'm finding the direct Braille 2000 import. This format made more sense to me. And it has the, it read the, closing some things out. It read the entry in cell 1 and did it as a nested list. Did the transcription in cell 3 on the next line. Why not just do it in columns? I'm guessing because some of these were so long, it wouldn't necessarily fit in columns. So this is how it was translated. Whoops. Back to my Braille 2000 window. So this makes sense. This was readable. You see all the pronunciation, the diacritics and the markings are all done as shown in print, which was very helpful. Turn this interpreter on. I'll give you the print view. So again, this was directly importing into Braille 2000. Now I actually did the, I opted to do it a little differently myself when I did this in print, in Braille rather. I'm entering to find out where it was from the top, glossary, next occurrence. Keep scrolling through until I get to, that's still the table of contents. Here I am in the text where the glossary is. And this is how this was formatted. I didn't do the nested list format simply because I didn't think it was necessary for the Braille reader to have access to which line was which. Nor did I use the table format. They're basically looking, okay, this is how this is pronounced. So again, it was a transcriber decision. It also allowed me to put the entire chart on 2 facing pages in Braille. I had the first page on the even number, which would be on the left, and the next page on the odd number, which would be on the right. So it comes out, the student can see the whole pronunciation guide. So again, there are a few that we have some leeway as transcribers, and I had my methods and material prof in college was great at doing things for the benefit of the reader, so the student. So that's my primary focus, of course, within the guidelines of UEBN formats and what's allowable. So that's that one example. But basically, I've found that the pronunciation does come in, translated, converted pretty well in NIMAS file. So see if there are any questions there.
So we just had one that just dropped into the chat. It says, why facing pages for glossary?
I didn't do that for the whole glossary. It was for the pronunciation key because it was the table. It's on a table. If you can't get it all on one page, putting it on facing pages is helpful. So.
And you know what, because we all need encouragement from time to time, just to let you know, one of our attendees said print view helps me orient what is being discussed. Thank you for turning it on for the pronunciation demo.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder to do that. Okay. Anything else, or shall we go on?
I think we are ready for math.
Okay. So math, the big one. Lots of discussion here. I'm going to take a look at MathML, what happens with Braille Blaster to Braille 2000 conversion, with Braille 2000 Direct Import, with Braille 2000 version 3, which is coming up. All of these are in development. And with that in mind, I'm going to ask Nicole Gaines from NIMAC if you will go ahead and give your explanation and update on what is MathML.
Sure. Thank you, Rosemary. And hi, everybody. I'm happy to talk with you a little bit about MathML. MathML is actually an XML markup language that is specifically designed to capture mathematic and scientific notation in order to make it available for automated translation into an accessible format. So in terms of the way MathML works with NIMUS, if you have used NIMUS files in the past, especially if you're a longtime user, you may have downloaded files that had math before, and you would find that all of the math equations are provided as images. That's because historically in printed textbooks, that's how publishers provide the images in those books. So when the publishers go to provide the NIMUS files, those images are created and supplied in the NIMUS file set as images, just like all of the other images for the print book. So the issue with that, of course, is that, again, if you are a Braille transcriber working with that type of file, you're going to be doing a lot of 6-key entry in order to capture all of those equations, because we're not able to automatically convert an image file into Nemeth. So that's where MathML comes in. Publishers are welcome to include MathML in their files. And we encourage states and districts, when they have their NIMUS language in their contracts, telling publishers, hey, I'm adopting this curriculum, please send NIMUS files to the NIMAC. And by the way, be sure that you include MathML for any math textbooks. And so basically, MathML is not a requirement of the NIMUS specification. It is optional. And so again, that's why it's really important for customers to ask for it when they're asking for NIMUS in those contracts with their publishers. But when they do supply it, it can be very, very beneficial if you have tools that can do that automated conversion. So that's kind of the first piece there, is just that it is optional code and it's very beneficial, with the caveat that you have to have software that is able to convert the MathML into an accessible format. And so one of the examples that Rosemary is going to be talking about in a moment is that Braille Blaster happens to be software that can automatically generate UEB math or Nemeth from MathML that's included in the NIMUS file. So before we talk more about that, I do want to just kind of dive a little bit more into the NIMAC system and show you, in terms of if you are a NIMAC user, if you are an accessible media producer, how you can tell, does this file have MathML? How will I know? And I'll also show you some options in terms of downloading, because if you are able to use the MathML, that's great. But if you're not able to use the MathML, you do have an option in the system to download the file without the MathML, and you will be supplied the images with the file, just as if it had been a file that was created without the MathML. We do this intentionally because we know not all software can work with MathML. And so any file that you find in the NIMAC that has MathML, it also has what we call fallback images, which just means that all of those equations are also there, kind of in the background, as image files if you need them. And so if you choose the no MathML download, we can supply those to you, and not the MathML. So I'm going to actually share my screen just for a moment here.
Do I need to stop my share, Nicole?
I believe that you do, because it says you cannot start screen sharing while the other participant is sharing. So, okay, let's try this again. And with any luck, I will choose the right screen. And yeah, so where I'm at now is I have just logged into a test account for an accessible media producer, and where that landing page is actually I'm in my downloads. I'm going to click the NIMAC logo to go back to the actual landing page, which is title assignments. And I want to just talk real briefly about a couple of different ways that you can tell whether or not a file that you've been assigned has MathML. The first way that you can do it is really easy. Anything that is in your title assignments, you can click on the actual title. It's a hyperlink, and that will take you to the full metadata record for that file. And where you're going to see the MathML is there. You'll see that the actual display is in 2 columns. That's the complete metadata for the book. And if MathML is present, you will see as kind of the last item that's in the second column in the column display, the MathML and the version of MathML. So for example, I've kind of highlighted here, this particular file has MathML3, and you will be able to see that from this page. If you don't see anything there in that particular spot, the file doesn't have MathML. Another way that you can tell, if I go back to my title assignments, if I select this title for download and say add to my downloads, I will get a dialog. And if you're a user, you're probably used to seeing there are different options. You can download the XML download, which does not include the images, or a full download. This is very similar to what you've seen in the past. But if a file has MathML, you will also see that you have a separate option here for the full download with no MathML. And this will include the images here. So you see it says includes images, no MathML. So that's another way that you can tell, oh, this file does include MathML, because I can choose to leave it out. Another thing that I'll just say as an aside is that whether you're an authorized user or an accessible media producer with the NIMAC, you can download a file as many times as you like. So it's not a problem if you mistakenly download the file with MathML and you really don't want it. You can go back and download it again. It's no problem. Or conversely, if you wanted that MathML and you didn't choose that option, you can just download it again. So that's not any problem at all. The last thing that I want to mention here in terms of being able to tell whether your file has MathML in it or not is if you're a little more of a techie person and you want to open up that XML file, you can actually see, I'm going to actually open up an XML file now and zip up to the top of the screen here. And so if you're not used to looking at MathML, none of this will make any sense to you, and you don't have to even worry about it. But if you just do a Control F for find and type MathML, you will see in this case, you see a bunch of things that reference MathML 2.0. This is what we call a MathML declaration. It's just the way that the XML file is structured that says, hey, this XML file actually also includes this MathML markup. And that kind of tells the software too, like, bing, 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 here's how you translate this. So that's a way that you can tell if there's MathML. If you open your XML and you don't see any reference to MathML at the top of the screen, then you don't have MathML in it. So just a few other things that I would like to just mention about this is that, again, Rosemary's going to talk a little bit about working with MathML with automated translation. And I will just say that because, again, the way that NIMAS is produced from the print book, from source files from the print book, sometimes what you will find is that if you have an automated translation with Braille Blaster to Nemeth, simpler math that may be included in the original book as text and not as an image math expression may not have been caught up in that automated translation, and you may have to go back through and kind of make sure that simple math that may have been just included in the book as text, you may have to manually change that to Nemeth. You shouldn't have this issue if you're doing an automated translation to UEB with just UEB math. That's not an issue, but it can come up when it happens to be a translation into Nemeth. So the only other thing that I would like to note is, before I hand it back to Rosemary, is that Braille Blaster is a tool that continues to be under development. We haven't gotten a lot of feedback in terms of the MathML translation, and so if you are a transcriber and you are using NIMAS, please let us know what your experience is, especially if you have any hiccups, if you see anything that looks like a bug. one of the things that is really great about the way that the NIMAC works with the conversion vendors is that we are really able to zero in if we have an issue with a file. Like, say, for example, something is not rendering correctly, and we can actually point to, that expression wasn't quite tagged correctly in the XML file. We can actually go back to that particular vendor and let them know, hey, there's an issue with this. If it's something that's across the whole file, we will require that they correct it. But we really need feedback from folks who are actually using this tool in the field, so that we can have that continuous improvement. So we would love to hear from you, and especially if you have any issues. So with that, I will just say, if there are any questions regarding MathML, let me know. I'd be happy to take a few questions now, or with that, hand it back to Rosemary.
I think that there are a few questions that we might be able, while we transition back to Rosemary, that we might be able to ask. I am. Let's see. I'm sorry. I'm looking through and scrolling through. I want to make sure, Rosemary, are you okay? Not seeing your picture light up as we wait for just a moment. Does the No Math ML option introduce any placeholders or spacing to the file where math is and was?
Basically, the No MathML option is going to provide you images where the MathML was, as if there was never even MathML in the file. So it's going to look exactly like a NIMAS file for a math textbook that didn't include MathML. So basically, the answer to that is you'll see an image there. The image will be there. Or if you're actually looking at the XML directly, you'll see the image reference for that equation.
Okay. Okay, so what I want to share, you know what? There you go. I was just going to share with you, Rosemary, that what you were sharing was the wrong screen. And so we want to make sure that you are on your presentation screen rather than the presenter. So we can try that one more time. Sometimes it's just a toggle of a.
Yeah, so I'm probably showing you all my busyness in the background.
No, we know, you know what? We are all super busy. There you go. Perfect. Right there.
Thank you. So are you ready for me to go ahead, Amy, then, or was there another question?
Go ahead and go on, and we are collecting questions, and we will filter back as we are able. And we also, to everyone in the audience, we do have a Q&A all tomorrow. So whatever is not attended to, don't worry, come back and see us tomorrow and we will get your questions answered.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Nicole. I just added the last line on this slide, which is information is as of May 2022. As Nicole said, all of these are in development. I'll just show you, before I move on to the NEMA section, show you a quick picture of what that image file looks like in one of my downloads. This is in a particular math book that I'm going to be showing you some examples from. This was an image file for a particular page that we're going to look at. This book was done with UEB with Nemeth import, Nemeth translation, and I used Braille Blaster as an intermediate step because it translated some of the Nemeth. So this is the image file, and you'll see it includes everything, including the pictures and the text. This one actually included most of it is math. So that's one example there. So moving on to math, I'll cover a little bit of Nemeth. I'm just going to show you a couple pictures that I've found in the current Braille Blaster conversion for UEB with Nemeth. It says, here's the fraction indicators pretty well. We ran into this thing recently, and I've been talking with Nicole about this. The square root, as I just showed, I'll pull that up again. These little guys, the square roots are actually converted into Nemeth pretty well. Once we get into cube root, something in the system had flipped the number in the index here, and the number in the radicand. So instead of the cube root of 100, it would say the 100th root of 3. So she enjoys the challenge. So we're trying to figure out where that is in the file. Is it in the XML file? Is it in something else that she just explained better than I could? But this is all an example of how this is still in development and how they need our feedback. So in roots with an index, the order of the index in the radicand is reversed. You need to edit. I just showed you that. You'll also need to add in the Nemeth switch indicators. And if you're a transcriber of Nemeth, you know that I don't think there's any easy way for a computer to figure out when to do that. So that's going to be, at least for the foreseeable future, something we need to do. A lot still needs to be edited. Braille Blaster is still in development. So let's look at a brief demo I have here of so this is, I don't need this one. I think I just opened. I thought I opened them. There's so many files here. So in Math, I'm going to open the NIMS file that shows that has that page with the pages 541 and 542. I just showed with the square roots, cube roots. This is an IMS import through Braille Blaster to Braille 2000. I can show quickly in print view. This is the NIMS file. You see a lot of the formatting done, which is great. It has the self-life headings, so on and so forth. But the Nemeth is not going to be legible unless you know the ASCII for Nemeth. So these are the square roots, square root of 8, and this was exactly as they appeared in print. Came down a little further in the file. This is scrolling through the NIMS file. Here is where this says 1 in the index and 3 inside, and it should be flipped. It should be the cube root of 1. So that's just one example of how the Nemeth is still in development. And also you see a lot of it then, as soon as it got away from the square roots, we were back into UEB translation. Here was this is the UEB equal sign. And UEB, this is another thing in NIMS. So I'm going to jump a little out of math here. You'll see that this underscore or the low dash used as a blank placeholder in math, cube root of 1 equals blank, is often being read as multiple symbols. So what I will do in a case like that, this is just jumping back to something I did before. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to set a bookmark here where I was, and I'm going to take to the end of the file, highlight it, do a search and find and replace. I'm going to paste into the find that long dash that I just looked at, and I'm going to replace it with a single dash and tell it to replace all, so that hopefully every place in the file where it was read as a long dash, as multiple cells, it'll come out single. So it did that. It also doesn't need to be underlined. So there are a lot of things that still need editing, but that's what we're doing. That's my one example. Page 626. This was something I found quite impressive in the NIMS translation, the Braille Blaster translation into Nemeth. This is one place where I thought, wow, because it's so complex.
Rosemary, I think that you accidentally got muted. You must have maybe hit something, so we haven't heard a few of the things that you have just said to us. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
It happens.
Always hitting things. I was just saying, I'm going to go back into another place that shows I was quite impressed with this translation. This again was Braille Blaster using UEB with Nemeth. This page here has quite, I'll show this page in a moment in the NIMAS conversion, you'll see the fractions. As soon as the fraction indicators came in, I'm guessing that whoever's working on this is doing a lot, started with fraction indicators. As soon as the fraction indicators came in, they actually get the exponents. And let me show you that in Braille. Well, probably leave that up for a minute while I'm finding the Braille file. I'll come back. So this file, there were several things in this book I did. I'm on page 553. I want to get to 626. I'm just going to do it the easy way and scroll down right now. 626. I have a bookmark these files. I'm sorry, this is just keep playing. Here, it's I'm going to try a search here to find it quickly. I'm just entering some of the text from the beginning of that page. There we go. Okay, this is the conversion, and you'll see this is UEB math right here. So this was a NIMAS translation, UEB with Nemeth, but there's so much to do. But as soon as we got into the fraction indicator, there you have the opening fraction indicator, 16, opening parentheses, times 3 to the 5th. There's the baseline indicator, closing parentheses, the fraction bar, over 4 times opening parentheses 3, closing parentheses, closing fraction indicator. They got the equal sign in there. I have to delete this extra space. And then they got the information after the equal, 12, opening parentheses 3 to the 4th, baseline indicator, closing parentheses. That's a completely accurate Nemeth translation conversion in that line because it was within the fractions. Here I'm back to, there weren't fraction indicators, so we're back to the UEB math. It's just shows me it's back and forth. Some of it's there, but it's not all there yet. We're still in UEB. Back to the print. $626. Well, that's another one. The one that worked. I'm just going to X out. This one worked. No, this one did not work. This is the cube. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm back and forth. The cube wrote a 1. These were all flipped, but that may have been fixed too. That's something that Nicole's been working on her end. And I'm just trying to find the print again for this. I thought I had these print files and I could find them quickly, but I have so many open that I'm not seeing them easily until I hover over each one. Here we go. Back to this one here. This is the one we just looked at. This was correct. And then I'm out because of the fraction indicators. Down here, these all came out as UEB. These came out completely as accurate Nemeth, including the word second, so 1/4 second, that because of the fractions, I'm guessing. And then these down here, as long as there were fraction indicators, the translation was completely accurate at Nemeth. So again, it's back and forth. We need to know our codes. We need to do editing as we see fit and entry.
And while you're adjusting to that, Rosemary, I just wanted to share that when you're doing a demo, if you are moving down towards the bottom of the page that you are on, if it's ever at all possible to kind of move the screen up at all, I'm not particularly understanding of how the screen, you interact with your screen and if you have the capability. Sometimes when you're working on things towards the bottom, the Zoom dashboard for our participants can sometimes cover up where you're at. So if you're highlighting something up above, I'm not sure if that made sense.
Okay, I think, okay, so for example, It'd be better if I work up here than down here.
Yes, yeah, exactly. If you did that, that is just a little bit of feedback that has come in and that went over my head initially. So I thank you for
Thank you.
that.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the one I just showed you, the coming back to Braille view, the 1/4 second, 1/8 second, 1/25. This was accurately done. Now you'll notice this is something I'm going to cover in miscellaneous section later on. One of the things that does not seem to come in the NIMAS files, I might as well mention it right here, is the identifiers. So this, for example, was page number 1. Do I still have that pulled up? No, I don't. That's screen share. I'm sorry, not page number 1. This is problem number 3, I think. Let's just say it's problem number 3. I'm going to have to enter that number 3, and I'm going to have to come down here at the end of this problem before the Nemeth work. Get back to print view for a second. That's my problem. I'm going to have Nemeth. I'm going to have to enter the Nemeth switch indicators. Everything following this is in Nemeth code. Then I'm going to have to come over here and enter the identifier. Since I'm in Nemeth, I use a grade 1 indicator before the letter A. And you'll see those show up in the print translation, the ABC, and then the rest is the Nemeth. So those have to be entered all throughout just about every file I've seen coming in from NIMAS. And I'm not sure why that is, but any place where there's a list where there's numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and under that ABCD, those identifiers need to be entered manually. However, the formatting is brilliant. This formatting was done with the NIMAS conversion. It's nested list format. Cell 1 run overs in 5, cell 3 run overs in 5. This is number 4. Again, and I'll scroll up on the screen a little bit. How do I do that? I have to come down here and do that. Okay. Back up to number 4. Again, I'm going to have to enter the Nemeth indicator. And this was what was brilliant. This was 10 to the 10 squared over 10 to the 5th. And accurate Nemeth translation. We're back to UEB on this one. So I would go in and enter that manually. This one is UEB. So I'd need to enter that manually. Just showing how I enter the identifiers. We'll cover that for the section later. Back to a fraction indicator. 5 squared baseline indicator over 5 to the negative second baseline fraction. All those symbols are there. So that gives me hope, you know, whoever's developing this, it will come eventually. But it seems to have something to do with the fractions. And my editing is slow, probably because I have so many things open. It's like, why is it taking so long? That's a little bit of demo on the Nemeth conversion. If there are any questions on just Nemeth, I can take them. Otherwise, we'll go on to more on math.
There was something in particular that had been put in the chat window, and Nicole answered it in a great way. I'm continuing to monitor things moving forward.
Okay. Okay, thanks. All right, so UEB technical, I've just shown you a little bit of it, the current Braille Blaster to Braille 2000 conversion. Now the file that I was showing you is one that did come in with MathML. I did use UEB with Nemeth. So I have some samples here of what happened with UEB math and one that was not converted through Nemeth. I have some sample elementary and then some upper level. Number corner 16. I have these. So if you're a praying person out there, just be praying for me to find these files quickly. All right. All right, number corner. This is to cover UEB technical. This is a sample page. And I can find that. That file is not where I'm expecting it to be. I'm going to go back and find it somewhere else. I can pull up this whole NIMS file for number corner because it's a relatively small one. I'm going to look at page 16 just to take a look at the UEB math of already showing you the print. So here again, I'll move this up to the top. Now, a couple things happened here. Back to the print page. Just move my zoom goes over in front of my, right, back to the print one we were just looking at. Or not. Just take a look at this. Looking at print view up here. This was all accurate. You had the 24 plus 8 divided by 4, 6 plus 14 equals 6. This was the UEB math coming in, and this was converted. Now I'm going to look and see what is that numeric indicator doing there. Huh. So I'll look back at, let's look back at the print page. And I apologize for this because I should have quicker looking at what these are. Of course, middle school, number corner. There we go. I'm going to leave this small down here for a moment so we can look at that. You'll see this, the way this was converted in the print view. The minute I did that, I took out the picture. Or the 24 plus 8 divided by 4, 24 plus 8 divided by 4, minus 6. Now the way the NIMS file converted it was as a table. I would do this. I don't even think these were related. If they get the answer and they create an answer shown in the print were related, the related columns, I would do them as a nested list, which is how I thought it came in. But since they're not, I did them as two separate columns. So again, you need to look at what's in the text and find out how to convert things. So basically the symbols are accurate. You're going to need to reformat, edit where needed. That's one sample. The other sample is upper level, and I can basically tell you that in say chemistry, some of the UEB comes in and some of it not. Your basic symbols come in when you get into upper level, things like the chemical symbols and where you have subscripts and superscripts. That needs to be manually entered. So any questions so far?
So there are a few questions. These might be kind of maybe a little bit of mix, a little bit of, here and there, depending on if we're talking about UEB technical or with NEMIS. So can't you just retranslate those lines of UEB math into Nemeth in Braille 2000 using the code function? That was the statement. Are you able to retranslate those lines of UEB math into Nemeth in Braille 2000 using the code function?
I don't see the code function doing Nemeth yet. Bob Step is working on that, but there's no
Okay,
current. And I will say, I've been doing Nemeth since 1988, and I haven't seen anything that accurately does all of it. So there's a little bit of a danger there. Definitely,
Mhm.
the conversions coming out are great, but we still need to know the code.
Mhm.
It's not going to get it. There's so many, even the thing we interacted with the other day about when to put in switch indicators. So no, the code function thus far does not cover that.
Okay.
But we'll talk more on that in the next slide though. So if there's another question, maybe I'll take that first.
Okay. There is one, this one has to do with Braille Blaster. Why wouldn't you just make Braille Blaster put all Math ML in Nemeth? Are you able to make context of that, or do we need a little bit more information?
Well, you spoke about the conversion, and this is what I showed in one of the earlier days, that when I imported this file, I did import it UEB plus Nemeth. And I think what we're talking about here is that it's going to take a long while for computer programmers, program developers to be able to program all of that into computers. I don't know if that answers the question. It's not complete yet.
No, that's fine. And someone had just popped into the chat that that was a question that was more for Nicole. So Nicole, is there a statement that you want to make?
Yeah, basically, in terms of the not having all of the MathML and not having all of the math expressions, we would like to know if you run across a situation where you're finding that, let us know and we will let the vendor know. We don't actually do, any Braille translations with the files and that kind of thing. And so we do look to users to let us know when these things come up. So basically, the long and short of it is that we know that this is an issue. Sometimes we don't know if it's an issue all of the time or most of the time, but we are more than happy to relay this back to publishers and vendors and say, hey, look, it looks like when you created the NIMAS file for this, you missed the simple math. Please make sure in future NIMAS preparation that you capture the simple math. And so we can relay that. We also, we share that with the publishers and vendors when we do our trainings and that kind of thing. But, for, just for the sake of having that feedback loop, we can try to improve the files going forward. Probably you'll find these with files that are already in the system, especially maybe some of the older files that have MathML in them. But we're always happy to get feedback when you run across something like that. And like I say, we are able to let the specific vendors know when these kinds of things come up. So do let us know. But as Rosemary said, I think it has to do with a lot of what happens with the NIMAS creation. We're talking about digital file conversion from one format to another. And, the reality is that sometimes you can do a certain amount of work on an automated basis. And then there are some things that you can only detect if you have an actual human being sitting there and looking through. And because some of that can't be automated, it's a little more complicated. It's not impossible. It's just a little bit more complicated. And so that's just feedback that we need to get to the particular vendors who are producing the files. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. And so I will just add to that as a transcriber again, what I've been saying, which is that I don't think there's ever going to be anything that completely translates anything that you just push a button and it's all completely there. I mean, that's where we come in as transcribers. So it's important to know our codes and proofread and edit. So, but with that caveat, Braille 2000 version 3, as we discussed earlier in the course, Braille 2000 is currently at version 2.29. I'm still using 2.275 because that's the only way I can import the large NIMAS files with math in them. But neither one of those are going to be developed a whole lot because Bob Step is working actively on version 3, and the biggest change, he says, is math. Now, his design goal for version 3 is to automatically import math of all kinds using NIMAS files, and that includes UEB with embedded Nemeth, and pre-2012 Nemeth. So that's the good news that kind of comes in here, but it's still in the beta stage as of May 2022. And Bob did say and asked me to invite me to go ahead and say that, well, number one, there is free text support available for users of Braille 2000, but also anyone who would like to be a version-free beta tester should contact Bob for access to the pre-released copy of Braille 2000 version 3. That's the one where he's been working on that. Oh, that's the news, the big news. So with that, that's all I have for math. And if there are any final questions on that, I can take those, or else I can go on.
I would say go ahead and continue with sidebars.
Thank you. Okay. Sidebars. This is, after all the math stuff, is actually relatively simple. Reading format section 12 to identify and format sidebars. I actually want to look at that online because the best place to get print examples of that is by looking at the online examples. They're very familiar with sidebars, so I'm going to go down here to section 12. I find the examples in here very helpful. Publisher design of textbooks has exploded into creative layouts that doesn't say it in here, that may create nightmares for transcribers that frequently challenge Braille production, put it that way. Textbook used to be black and white, had few images, context was read from top to bottom. Textbooks now are full of color, images, tables, boxes, bullets, etc., and reading order is not always obvious. Big challenge for NIMAS files. I will say that pretty much all of the information that I've seen in sidebars in the print books I'm transcribing does appear in the NIMAS file. So it's just a matter of searching for it and formatting it according to this. So there's a lot of information on it, identifying sidebars in formats 12. I won't read all of that right now. Formatting is going to, this is where your samples come in. Determine if the sidebar supports the text or if it is supplemental information. Once this has been decided, it's easier to find the most appropriate location to insert it. So I have a couple samples here. I don't need that one anymore. 6 out of that. I'm going to go into sidebars. Here's an example, a print example of the number corner print table of contents. This is supplemental information that could be considered either a note or sidebar. It's information that's outside of the regular text. It's at the end of the table of contents, and therefore in the table of contents we already did this the other day. I simply put that, figured out where it fit in the text. It was needed for the table of contents, but it wasn't really crucial. Put this on print view. It's at the bottom, so I placed it at the bottom. Oh, this is the finished file. Let me scroll up. Trying to get this at the top of the page for you. There's the print view, the Braille view. This information was here in the text, in the NIMAS file rather. And I simply needed to format it for table of contents, which meant leave at least 6 spaces, between the end of the text and the far right margin to fit in with the table of contents format. So that's one very simple one. Another example. This particular page, we did look at the cubed root. We had this for cube root. There's also this information over here. This is a perfect example of a sidebar. And take note, it's in reference to the text. I just decided to put it depending on the context here. I probably put this after the section of numbers, after problems. Okay, or it would have been put up here. You look at that, you decide where is this going to make sense. I wouldn't put it in the middle of the problems. Create the flow, keep the flow going. So let's minimize this. Go back and find the print or the Braille for that. Sidebar in the table of contents. Oh, that was, I'm sorry, not this one. I had the sidebar in this is not the right one either. It's how I labeled these. I'm sorry. Page 542. Well, basically what I did was I put it in a box. I knew there's a file in here somewhere. This is the middle school math, page 550 to the end. This will do it. No, that's 553. I'm going to go down. Here's what I'll do. I know in this file there is another one. Take note. There are a lot of sidebars in this particular text that have this heading, take notes. I'm going to find the next one in the text, and there it is. Basically, I would keep that as a sidebar. I would probably, this is actually the page. I would take out the bold because it's not necessary. And I have formatted these in this text in a box. And what I'll do right now, this is actually some of the miscellaneous. How about if I pause on sidebars and see if there are any questions here? And I'll go on and demonstrate this along with some of the material and miscellaneous. There's a lot of overlap here, as I mentioned. So
we don't actually have any questions at this time for you at the moment, Rosemary.
Okay. I think the sidebars are pretty self-explanatory in that what you have to do is look at formats, decide where to put them and how to format them based on formats, and they're so different. So the miscellaneous included in that have some information on box lines. They don't appear in the IMS translation, so we create those and decide ahead of time when you're pre-formatting the book how you're going to format your boxes, what's going to be in boxes, what's not. I've already showed some whole file substitutions when importing the IMS file. For example, the apostrophe for the single closing quotation, that was something did back earlier in the course. Repeated headings, and I'm going to show this right here, the ellipses. Repeated headings with transcriber defined icon included. And then the ellipses, transcriber decision based on the majority of usage in the text. Are you going to have them connected to the previous word or spaced? That's a formatting decision. So that and nested lists. I've already talked about the fact that identifiers are not always imported. And the bullets are not always imported. I think I have one file where I can show a bunch of these things together, proofread and edit accordingly. And then the line number text would be something else. Let me do that demo so far on these things that I have. Yeah, 622. my miscellaneous file here. So I have this page open, and look at 625. All right. I think I have 626 open. I just showed a page there. This is the NIMS file with various things in here. I'm going to go through and just edit several things on page 26. Probably already said a bookmark, but I'm not going to. I'm trying to figure that out. So on this page, I'm going to need to, I'm sorry, move it down, move it up further. I'm going to need to insert my identifiers. First, of course, I would be all on one page for this problem. I would have to edit my math, so on and so forth. I've done that. I'm going to go down and look for this particular text here, habits of mind. This is a sidebar in throughout this book. It's a sidebar in just about every section in this book. Begins with habits of mind, which they've already formatted in cell 5, which I like that. I'm going to show the print view. Now I've done this in Braille by creating a box around these. In print, there are bullets to the left of each of these points. Notice that the nested list format came in. I'm going to insert my bullets. Now, I'm going to do this in Braille view. Insert my bullet there. I'm going to create a box around it. Now, I've created a speed Braille key for an opening box line, and it's not going to work for me right now. So I'm just going to enter it manually. Let's see if the one for the closing box works. Nope. It's because I'm on Zoom. I don't know why it is that the speed Braille keys I created for the box lines aren't working there. So that's an example of having to, notice that when I inserted that bullet, it ended at the line above because there was probably not a page break indicator in the Braille 2000 conversion. So I just hit enter there to move it to the next line. And there's my box. Now, in one of the books that I'm doing, and some of them there will be transcriber, there'll be icons in print. So I have it in another file. I'm not going to look for that right now. Let's just say that this is the one where that's the case. And it's a little piece of paper and a pencil. And so I've created a symbol for that I've created a symbol for that in this file. And the reason for that is I find that students, agencies will pretty much want those in there. If there's going to be a possibility of referencing it in the text, if the print user is going to be referring to, okay, there's the paper pencil icon, then we want to include that in Braille. So it's immediately before the cell 5 headings. Let's just say that there's one before habits of mind, and it's a pencil and paper. And I've created this transcriber defined icon symbol. So it's the transcriber symbol and then PE for P for pencil. And what I do at the beginning of my NIMS file is I will take this part, for example, the habits of mind, copy that. I'm going to set a bookmark there. And I'm going to go to the end of the file, highlight that, and paste in here habits of mind. And then under replace, I'm going to put the habits of mind, and I'm going to precede it with the transcriber defined symbol that I just created, because I want that to appear throughout the text, every place habits of mind appears. Now, I've already looked through my print text to say that, yes, this appears every place. Rather than directly enter it every time I come across this heading, I'm going to do a system replace for the whole file, rather. I take replace all. I'm going to take it from the cursor. Well, I guess it did replace all. And I'm going to go back to my bookmark. Now, just to make sure that it happened, I'm going to do a search in the system for habits of mind and go to the next place, or go from the cursor and see if it automatically included that. We are being really slow today. Next. Okay, now what this tells me, I did not do that accurately because I clicked when I did the, I'll show you how I do this again. I'm going to do it again from here. I have habits of mind there. So what I did was, it was in the symbol. I took it from the cursor and it only probably did the one at the cursor. I'm going to enter this symbol. I'm going to enter the cell 5 heading and do replace all. And it should replace all of them in the file. Back to my bookmark. Now, if I search for I don't have to enter the whole thing. I know I want to just find it from the cursor. That's the one right at the cursor. I want to see the next one. So it's automatically inserted the icon here, the icon symbol, every place I see habits of mind. Now, habits of mind in this text does not have a paper and pencil or pencil icon, but I just did an example to show you what it could do. That's my file system replace. The bullets not being always imported, I showed entering some of those. Any questions thus far? I know there's a lot of complex files here I'm looking for and getting lost on. So
No, we are doing great. Thanks, Rosemary.
All right. The last thing then I'll show is just there was a question about the line number text formats, section 15. Let's take a quick look at that. There are several places in print where line number text can come in. We're going to look at the formats again in section 15. And then I'm going to show you a sample of an IMAS file that was imported with line number text. What I found helpful in here were the samples at the end. There's these different examples of line number prose, line number poetry. I don't think the computer's necessarily going to understand the difference between that. We're going to have to figure that out as transcribers based on format. But here are the samples. This section, at the end of each section in formats, the samples are wonderful. Each one of these corresponds to a section in the file, but I'll just scroll through. This would be margin numbered paragraphs. The file I'm going to show you has some margin numbered paragraphs. It has some prose. So these are the ways they're to be done in Braille. And I have yet to contact Bob Stepp and say, okay, how do you do these? Is there a quick setup in Braille 2000? I'm guessing there is. Several years ago, I did a Latin book that had a lot of poetry in it, and I did all this manually. How many spaces do you leave here? And it was very labor intensive, proofreading intensive. So I'm guessing he has something out there. If anyone knows that for sure, please drop it in the chat, and I will look at that before next week, the Q&A session. But what I can do right now is just show you this one. I think I already have that pulled up in Braille. Yay, this one's here. This is an English text. They came in with a lot of, in Braille, there is line number text a lot. And let me just show the print page, print view. So these paragraphs are numbered in print. And I think it's very commendable to the non-math readers that they got that, because this print book is one of those ones that's done in a light black type. And the print numbers are like in gray. It's very visually challenging. But it's all imported in the NIMAS file. Now, this was a Braille 2000 direct translation. These were itemized. These identifiers came up. So this particular file was one that showed a lot of these things that I'm saying were not necessarily there in others. Now, I also imported it directly into Braille 2000. The other one where I had to use Braille Blaster as an intermediary was because I was checking out the Nemeth. It says no Nemeth, so see what these look like in here. And again, some of these, there's poetry in here somewhere. Again, if someone knows and wants to drop it in the chat, otherwise I will check with Bob Stepp before next week and find out what provisions he has made for doing that in Braille 2000, if you need the line numbers at the right margin. So, Amy, I am down to just Q&A.
That is great. I will ask, when we have, let me insert this one question and redirect me if this has been somehow addressed throughout our chat today in learning from you. How does Braille 2000 handle alt text for images? Have we discussed that at all? Or is that a good question for tomorrow?
Well, I remember looking at that some time ago, one of the practice sessions, I believe, with Liz or Nicole, and showed me what the alt text is. Basically, Braille 2000, if that's what's in the NIMAS file, Braille 2000 will show it as there's a little symbol in front of it, and then it just reads it alt text for da 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 da. It's the description converted as a description, which basically as transcribers, I take out, because I'm going to be doing my own transcriber's note if it's needed, because I'm thinking of how this is going to translate for the student. Again, as transcribers, we're looking at what's going to work for the student and what's going to communicate clearly. So yes, that's what I've seen, and I've seen that frequently. The alt text is converted into Braille just as it is in as it's been entered. The question is, does it fit for the student?
One question, Rosemary. So in other words, do you have an option in the software to tell it not to do the alt text, to tell it to skip it, or is it just kind of a default?
In Braille 2000, I don't know, but I can ask Bob.
Yeah, I was just curious because, in terms of the alt text that we get, it's getting better. It's getting better and getting better. And it's similar to MathML. Alt text is not required, but we do get it sometimes. And it ranges from excellent to not so good. And so I just was curious whether or not, because I can imagine that in most cases, transcribers are in the same position that you are referenced in terms of like, I'm the transcriber, I'm going to decide what the student really needs to know. And so I'm just curious as, if you're actually kind of creating those descriptions yourself as you go through, maybe that alt text, you don't even really want that to appear in the automated conversion.
That's a very good point, and I will ask him about that. Thank you. Because yes, I just keep going back to it's the teacher in me. Because the alt text may be describing an image, the question is, what does the text around it in the book for the student say? Is it referencing that image? Is it not? Do we need it? What part of the image is needed? What's not? And so on and so forth. I keep singing that song. So yeah, but I will check with him on that.
Okay. Well, we are to the closing of our time of spending together here for this session 5. We do welcome you back. Tomorrow is our 6th and final edition. It's all Q&A. Perfect place to come and ask your questions, get your answers. We have been collecting questions along the way, reading and scouring over the chat files in order to help us think about what sorts of things you might be wanting to know more about. So please be sure to catch us tomorrow for that last edition.